The first anomaly arrived without light or sound, an invisible fracture that slipped through the frozen night and rewrote the air above the tundra. Sensors caught it before any human eye did, a ripple in magnetic fields that folded, paused, and vanished. To satellites, it appeared as a data gap, a void in the chain of measurement. For one fraction of a second, the world ceased to report its own existence. In orbit, Commander Adrian Kale studied the telemetry from the control deck of Orbital Command 6. He had seen wars unfold through numbers before, but never through absence. The screen showed nothing where something should have been, and the nothing terrified him more than any missile trajectory. Around him, the hum of the station deepened as processors strained to reconstruct what physics itself refused to record. The Arctic grid flickered on and off like an arrhythmic pulse, as though reality were struggling to maintain coherence. Far below, the tundra near Norilsk lay silent under a thin layer of hoarfrost. The Joint Response Task Group, codenamed Echo 9, descended through gray cloud in armored drop shuttles. When they reached the site, the land appeared glassed, carved into concentric rings that glimmered faintly under the northern aurora. The soil had been fused into a mirror of itself, a geometry too precise for any known blast pattern. Captain Mara Sands advanced through the stillness, exosuit servos murmuring beneath her. Sensors whispered across her visor feed. No radiation, no residual heat, no particulates, only an ambient hum too constant to measure. Her boots left no imprint. Every movement felt slightly delayed, as if the air resisted her intrusion. A tremor passed through her chest, and for an instant her vision doubled. The world split into two overlapping frames, one slightly paler, one darker, like an echo of reality. Then it snapped back. A residue of static crawled along her skin. Her breathing sounded hollow in her helmet, as though the atmosphere were out of phase. Her squad spread across the scorched field, drones hovering above them like silent insects. The light from their lamps fractured strangely, refracting around invisible curves. The entire site radiated a sense of geometry trying to heal itself. Instruments registered fluctuations too fast to display. Each reading contradicted the last. The distortion appeared without transition. One moment there was only frozen air. The next, a shape emerged within it, refracted and prismatic, edges sliding against each other like fluid glass. It stood at human height, but lacked anything human. Its outline flickered with impossible precision, each movement bending the light around it into fractal reflections. The creature seemed to contain more dimensions than the space it occupied. Weapons discharged. Rail slugs tore across the field and bent mid-flight, trajectories warped by local curvature. Explosions flared and imploded without sound. Energy dispersed as though absorbed into an unseen depth. The air folded inward, compressing dust and frost until the horizon bowed. Men and women fell, thrown aside by a force with no visible source. The creature did not strike in anger. It simply existed, and that existence disrupted everything near it. When the distortion faded, it left no body, no debris, only a vacuum of presence. The land rippled once more and stabilized. Instruments rebooted automatically. The silence afterward felt heavier than the violence had. Hours later, the data reached orbit. The captured frame froze at the moment before the entity vanished, revealing a surface that shimmered with reflections of other skies. Each facet of its armor, or whatever passed for armor, contained another world: clouds, suns, unfamiliar stars. It was as though the figure had been made of parallel realities stitched into human form. Kale watched the image until his vision blurred. Analysts around the globe struggled to define what had happened. Reports called it an experimental malfunction, a quantum event, a classified test gone wrong. Those with access to deeper files understood that no known nation possessed the ability to warp space so cleanly. The incident was named Quantum Event Horizon 01, a title that masked the fear behind bureaucratic precision. In a subterranean complex beneath Geneva, Dr. Ilara Voss examined resonance graphs that resembled heartbeats of the universe. The distortion matched no known energy signature. Its symmetry implied intelligence. Somewhere, something had manipulated quantum states of space-time with surgical accuracy, bridging between possibilities rather than points in space. It was not an explosion, but an intersection, two versions of reality grazing against each other long enough to wound both. She worked through 26 hours without rest, tracing entanglement echoes through global sensor nets. Each signal carried interference patterns that hinted at more incursions waiting to happen. The harmonics suggested intent, a mapping process across multiple coordinates of reality. It was as though an unseen intelligence were sampling this world from another layer of existence. Above the atmosphere, Kale coordinated global defense networks into uneasy readiness. Intercept protocols were useless against a phenomenon that ignored conventional physics. Satellites watched, listened, waited for the next ripple. He had commanded fleets against cyber war and orbital sabotage, but nothing in his experience prepared him for a threat that did not move in time as he understood it. On the surface, Mara recovered in a sterile medbay, her skin marked by fine geometric burns invisible to the naked eye. The dead from her unit were sealed in radiation-proof casings, though no radiation had been detected. When she closed her eyes, she felt the echo of the doubled world inside her eyelids, a faint flicker, as if her body still carried two overlapping versions of itself. Medical scans reported microphase irregularities across her neural lattice. She was alive, but the data disagreed on how exactly she existed. Days blurred into briefings and rehearsals. Humanity had learned only that the enemy, if it could be called that, could open doors wherever it pleased. The second anomaly appeared over the Pacific, the third near the Sahara. Each event lasted longer, each leaving behind fragments of matter that defied composition analysis. A shard of black glass pulsed with inner light, its surface rewriting at the molecular level every few seconds, as if it were remembering and forgetting its own structure. Alara's research suggested that the incursions formed a pattern, each aligned along quantum resonance nodes that corresponded to probability densities rather than geography. The locations were not chosen by position, but by correlation, points where this world overlapped most closely with its neighboring realities. The implication was devastating. The intrusions might not be attacks, but bleed-throughs from adjacent universes trying to occupy the same coordinates. In orbit, Kale examined the correlation maps and saw strategy hidden in mathematics. Even if the events were unintentional, they behaved tactically, probing infrastructure, communications, population centers. He began to restructure command hierarchies, merging physics labs with military divisions. Each incursion was treated as both scientific experiment and hostile action. Humanity would learn the enemy's language or perish attempting to speak it. Mara returned to duty with a rebuilt team. Their armor carried prototype dampers, miniature fields designed to stabilize local quantum states for brief durations. The suits consume power at alarming rates, their reactors needing constant cooling. Every movement under the dampers felt heavy, as though walking through water thickened by gravity. Yet it was the only protection against dissolution when the next breach came. The seventh incursion erupted above the Sahara. Sensors caught the distortion before it fully opened, allowing the first coordinated counter-deployment. Drop pods descended through storm-racked skies into a sea of red sand. The desert warped beneath them, dunes freezing in motion, grains suspended midair by temporal drag. The soldiers of Ghostline landed among sculptures of sand that had forgotten how to fall. Their visors shimmered with static as the dampers fought to hold reality steady. Within minutes, the horizon split. A sphere of inverted light expanded, lightning flowing inward rather than out. Shapes emerged within the distortion, angular constructs resembling drones but alive with shifting geometries. Every movement they made carried an afterimage, like frames of reality slightly out of sync. When kinetic fire met them, trajectories curved away. The slugs pulled off course by invisible gradients. Energy discharges folded back into their sources. The battlefield became a maze of delayed cause and effect. The desert shimmered again, and for a brief, nauseating instant, another landscape overlaid the sand, a wasteland of rusted vehicles and blackened towers under a crimson sky. Ghostline's sensors recorded two overlapping topographies, each identical in contour but divergent in history. The team stood simultaneously in two deserts, one alive, one ruined. Across the mirage horizon, soldiers appeared. They moved with human precision, their silhouettes unmistakable. They bore the same armor design, the same insignia, inverted like a reflection. The opposing force reacted with uncanny synchronization. Every maneuver mirrored Ghostline's tactics a fraction of a second ahead. Each attempt to flank met a counter already in motion. The battlefield dissolved into mirrored choreography. Time itself became the adversary. The dampers strained against the synchronization. The mirrored army existed half a breath in advance, acting on probabilities that had already unfolded. Ghostline adapted by lagging their systems, embracing deliberate delay to exploit the narrow window of reversal that followed each mirrored movement. The desert erupted into asynchronous warfare, one side acting slightly too soon, the other retaliating just late enough to predict. 15 minutes later, the distortion imploded. The sands cascaded back into motion. The mirrored soldiers dissolved into vapor, leaving behind faint outlines burned into glass. Ghostline reemerged battered but intact, their power reserves drained to critical. The dampers melted from thermal overload. Their armor carried the residue of two separate timelines compressed into one. In the orbital command deck, Kale and Alara studied the aftermath. The data revealed a terrifying symmetry. The opposing forces' biosignatures matched Ghostline's almost exactly, differing only by infinitesimal quantum deviations. They had not faced invaders but counterparts, humans from a parallel reality intersecting by accident or intent. Each world perceived the other as the intrusion. Recovery teams collected fragments of fused matter from the desert, samples still oscillating between molecular states. Alara analyzed them until the oscillation ceased. Every trace suggested a single conclusion. Both realities were becoming aware of each other. The boundary between universes had been breached not as an isolated experiment, but as a natural escalation. The laws of physics were no longer fixed. They had become negotiable. In the days that followed, silence hung over command centers. Soldiers repaired armor, scientists recalibrated dampers, governments prepared statements they did not believe. Across the night sky, orbital detectors registered faint flickers, new distortions forming, brighter, steadier, deliberate. Kale watched from the observation deck as one shimmer grew over the curve of the Earth, steady as dawn. The pattern was no longer random. It pulsed in rhythmic intervals, like a signal. Humanity had struck back once, and now the other side was responding in kind. The alarms began to wail across the station. Data feeds spiked, saturating the air with static. The shimmer swelled into brilliance, filling the viewport with shifting layers of color that refused to exist in a single spectrum. The commander felt the weight of inevitability settle upon him. The war between realities had truly begun. The shimmer over Earth did not vanish. It lingered like a second sun, motionless yet alive, radiating neither heat nor light, but a kind of perception. Around the planet, orbital arrays tracked its oscillation with mounting dread. The frequency was steady, deliberate, mathematical, proof of intention. Humanity had spent centuries decoding random noise from the cosmos, searching for intelligent signal. Now intelligence had arrived, not from the stars, but from the cracks within reality itself. In the weeks that followed, the world reorganized itself into defense. Nations that once competed now shared code, hardware, and desperation. Quantum threat. Protocols unfolded faster than treaties could formalize them. Every laboratory, every array, every defense grid tuned to one goal: prediction. The incursions no longer struck at random. Each appeared at calculated resonance nodes, as if testing humanity's response time and threshold of adaptation. Commander Kale barely slept. From the command deck of Orbital 6, he oversaw 3 continents' worth of operations. The station hummed under constant power draw. Heat sinks bled orange through the vacuum. Engineers rerouted coolant systems hourly to prevent reactor overload. Data from the previous engagements revealed something vital. Each incursion shared an identical resonance pattern, only offset by microseconds. The pattern implied a synchronization process, a gradual alignment between worlds. The entity or entities were not simply crossing dimensions, they were harmonizing them. On the surface, Dr. Ilara Voss worked in isolation beneath the Swiss Alps. Her team had evolved from scientists into combat analysts, modeling the physics of invasion. She traced interference harmonics until the numbers blurred, until even the quiet hum of her workstation felt like part of the signal. The incursions were learning, adapting to countermeasures, shifting frequency ranges faster than predictive models could catch. Each adjustment suggested feedback from observation, a kind of sentience nested within the physics itself. The most disturbing revelation came from a captured artifact retrieved by Ghostline from the Sahara engagement, a shard of black material pulsing with recursive light. When cooled to near absolute zero, the fragment emitted low-frequency vibrations indistinguishable from human brainwave patterns. It was as if consciousness had been embedded within the matter, or the matter had once been conscious. Ilara concluded. It was not a weapon, but a piece of structure, an architectural element from the other side. Meanwhile, Captain Mara Sanz recovered physically, but not mentally. Every mission replayed in her thoughts, looping fragments of doubled horizons and mirrored soldiers who had moved just ahead of her. The medtechs called it phase residue, but she recognized it as memory, hers and not hers intertwined. Some nights she awoke certain she had already lived the coming day, her senses half a second too early. The feeling grew stronger each time she trained with the new dampers. Her body had adapted faster than theory predicted. The Ghostline unit underwent relentless retraining. Their armor evolved into quantum-stabilized exosuits capable of partial synchronization with alternate states. Every deployment now demanded a balance between endurance and containment. Too much synchronization risked temporal drift. Too little left them vulnerable to collapse. The soldiers learned to feel the minute vibration of their own probability fields, to sense when the air thickened, when space began to hum. They became living instruments of detection. The second wave came without warning, erupting in the Indian Ocean. From orbit, it resembled a wound of light stretching 300 kilometers wide. The water rose in a smooth dome, suspended against gravity, while vessels along the perimeter disintegrated into sprays of glass. Within the dome, time slowed by 40%. Clocks diverged, radio signals arrived before transmission. Ghostline deployed again, descending through vapor that refracted the sun into prismatic rings. The ocean surface solidified beneath them, a mirror of frozen fluid. Footfalls left no ripples. The entire dome felt hollow, an inverted cathedral of water. Inside it floated structures, towers of translucent matter, half-formed, half-erased. The architecture resembled coral grown from mathematics, perfect and terrible. The structures emitted faint pulses of energy that resonated with the frequency Ilara had identified. They were not weapons. They were beacons. Sensors failed within minutes. The team advanced through corridors of liquid glass, marking anchor points with quantum beacons to track position. Each beacon flickered between coordinates, vanishing and reappearing meters away, as if the geometry refused to remain fixed. Then came the first motion. From the depths below, figures rose, sleek, angular metallic silhouettes trailing ribbons of luminescent particles. Unlike the previous entities, these did not distort light. They emitted it, weaving luminous trails through the suspended water. The battle unfolded in silence. Kinetic weapons tore cavities that closed instantly as the water healed itself. Energy pulses ricocheted through refracted paths. The dampers groaned under strain. Every impact seemed to occur twice, a half-second, apart as though time were replaying its own decisions. Ghostline fought not to kill, but to collect data, mapping interference nodes, retreating before their suits overheated. When the last beacon collapsed, the dome imploded, releasing a surge of displaced energy that cracked the sky. From orbit, Kale watched the wavefront race across the sea. Power grids on 3 continents blinked offline. The implosion dragged electromagnetic storms around the equator, yet buried in the chaos was data, the harmonic code embedded in the beacon pulses. For the first time, humanity possessed a key. The pattern revealed a cycle. Each incursion sought alignment with an underlying constant, a universal frequency toward which both realities were converging. If completed, the merge would annihilate one side entirely. Alara decrypted the code piece by piece. The math implied communication, not conquest. The beacons were messages written in the medium of existence itself. Their sender might not even comprehend the destruction they caused. From their perspective, alignment could be salvation, not war. She faced an impossible choice: to warn Command that humanity's resistance might provoke greater instability, or to continue feeding tactical data that enabled counterattacks. Her hands trembled each time she entered another formula, knowing that every insight might be another weapon. Kale pushed the global defense network harder. Orbital reactors strained under continuous operation, coolant systems bleeding white vapor into space. Drones patrolled high orbit, carrying entanglement mines designed to disrupt phase coherence. They could not destroy the enemy, but they could slow synchronization by injecting chaos into the quantum field. The strategy bought time at the cost of energy reserves. Every maneuver carried risk of reactor failure, yet retreat meant erasure. Mara and Ghostline became legends whispered through encrypted channels. They were the only humans to have entered the anomaly zones and returned intact. Each mission left them scarred in ways medics could not diagnose. As the incursions multiplied, humanity adapted through desperation. Power plants converted into entanglement stabilizers. Cities dimmed their lights to conserve grid stability. Communication shifted to quantum mesh relays that operated through entangled pairs, immune to time lag but prone to burnout. Civilization became a network of disciplined silence, every transmission measured, every watt precious. Then came the breakthrough. Alara's team discovered that the incursion's resonance aligned with fluctuations in Earth's magnetosphere during solar storms. By manipulating the magnetic field, it might be possible to divert or dampen an incursion before it reached full coherence. The idea transformed defense into strategy. Instead of waiting for attacks, they could influence where and when reality fractured. Kale authorized Operation Aegis, the creation of orbital magnetostabilizers capable of shaping the planet's field. Massive rings deployed along geostationary orbit, glowing faintly as they spun. Their construction drained the last reserves of global cooperation, but once active, the stabilizers offered a semblance of control. For the first time since the first anomaly, humanity dictated the terms of engagement. The next incursion struck near the stabilizer array. Sensors registered the familiar distortion, but this time the field held. The incursion wavered, struggling to manifest. Ghostline launched immediately, intercepting the breach mid-formation. They entered a maelstrom of distorted starlight where space folded like origami. The dampers synchronized perfectly with the stabilizer's field, allowing the team to maneuver within the turbulence. Through the distortion, they glimpsed another world. Mountains of black crystal, seas that shimmered like mercury, skies fractured into shards of dawn. In the distance hung structures that might have been cities or living organisms, suspended within veils of light. The team captured data until their instruments melted. Before retreating, Mara reached out instinctively toward the void between worlds. For a heartbeat, her hand seemed to touch another hand, a reflection, or a counterpart, before both dissolved into static. The mission proved that controlled synchronization was possible. The stabilizers could open windows safely, albeit briefly. Humanity had, for the first time, looked into the multiverse deliberately. Yet victory came at a price. Energy consumption reached catastrophic levels. Reactors overheated faster than cooling systems could compensate. Entire orbital sectors shut down to prevent chain detonation. The stabilizers, once symbols of control, became fragile barriers held together by dwindling power. Alara studied the feedback loops and realized the danger too late. Each stabilization pulse increased the resonance amplitude of the opposing reality. Every attempt to control the fractures strengthened them. The two universes were locked in a feedback spiral, accelerating toward irreversible fusion. The data left her cold. To stop the process, humanity would have to disable its own defenses, leaving the planet exposed. To continue meant mutual annihilation. Kyle faced the decision alone in the command deck's silent glow. The stars outside flickered through the glass, their light distorted by gravitational lensing from the expanding rift. He understood the tactical impossibility of surrender, yet he also sensed the futility of fighting a mirror. Every instinct of command screamed for resistance, but the numbers spoke of entropy, not victory. Far below, Mara and her team prepared for another deployment. Their suits glowed faintly with the signatures of past incursions, each mark a memory of survival. The air around them vibrated with the low hum of the approaching rift. They moved without hesitation, driven by duty rather than hope. Every breath felt borrowed from a universe that might not exist tomorrow. In the depths of her lab, Alara transmitted her final calculations through the entanglement net. The results projected an intersection point where both realities would collide within 72 hours. The location: near equatorial orbit, directly above the primary stabilizer ring. The collision would erase both worlds unless the resonance sequence could be inverted, a maneuver no human system could execute. Without direct contact from within the rift itself, the decision formed, silently across every command center. Every mind tuned to the same grim logic. Someone would have to cross the boundary and trigger the inversion manually. No machine could survive the instability. Only a living consciousness could adapt in real time. The mission would be one way, the traveler consumed by overlapping realities. Kel watched the planet's curvature burn faintly in the growing light of the rift. Around him, systems flickered as energy drained into the stabilization grid. He thought of the soldiers, the scientists, the billions, unaware of how thin the membrane of their world had become. The burden of command pressed like gravity, inescapable and absolute. The rift widened, filling the viewport with swirling luminescence that bent the stars. The hum of the station merged with the frequency of the anomaly until it became indistinguishable from the sound of his own pulse. Humanity stood at the edge of understanding, one decision away from extinction or transcendence. In the silence before the alarms began again, Cale realized the war had changed. It was no longer about territory or survival, but definition. The question that had named this new era returned to him, stripped of irony and theory. In the wake of the quantum revolution, had humanity ever truly been confined to a single world? Or had it always lived within the overlap of infinite ones? The rift pulsed once, steady and slow, like a heartbeat too vast to belong to any creature, and the station shuddered under its breath. The orbital horizon glowed with impossible color as the rift expanded, folding light into recursive spirals that pulsed across the stratosphere. The fabric of the world quivered like a living membrane straining against itself. Communication arrays failed one by one as transmission bands twisted through fluctuating frequencies that no spectrum analyzer could map. The Earth's shadow fractured into overlapping silhouettes. For every star in the night sky, another flickered half a degree beside it, a reflection of reality slowly drifting out of phase. Commander Cale stood within the observation vault. His reflection stretched and doubled on the polarized glass. Power reserves across the orbital defense network had fallen below critical thresholds. The reactors that kept the quantum dampers stable were burning through their final containment cores. Every projection ended the same way. The convergence event would reach total overlap within 72 hours. Once that occurred, no amount of force could separate the two realities without annihilating both. Below him, the world had already begun to split along probability seams. Cities flickered with duplicate versions of themselves, ghost skylines layered over real ones, shadows moving independently of those who cast them. Aircraft navigation systems failed as air currents misaligned between layers. In some places, entire districts vanished and reappeared seconds later with subtle differences. Windows displaced, towers a meter taller, faces slightly unfamiliar. Civilians recorded footage that contradicted itself between devices. Dr. Elara Voss no longer slept. The Geneva complex had collapsed into a fevered workshop of overlapping realities. She moved between laboratories that seemed to shift positions every hour, as though the building itself were choosing from parallel designs. Her data streams pulsed with residual harmonics from the last incursion, signals that carried echoes of human thought from the mirrored world. The waveforms bore cognitive fingerprints that mirrored her own. Somewhere across the divide, another version of her was running the same calculations, feeding into the same interference pattern. She realized then that communication might already be occurring, not through words or channels, but through entangled cognition. Each mirrored counterpart was influencing its opposite unconsciously, steering probability toward alignment or collapse. The convergence was no invasion. It was a conversation conducted in the language of physics. Yet, even a conversation could destroy worlds if shouted too loudly. Mara Sans led her unit across the desolate outskirts of what had once been the Mongolian plateau. The air was alive with static haze, shimmering in columns that reached into the clouds like ghost architecture. Ghostline had been redeployed under new directives to secure resonance anchors where dimensional overlap was strongest. Their exosuits now carried portable stabilizers, compact generators capable of anchoring localized pockets of reality for minutes at a time. The devices consumed fuel cells at an impossible rate, venting plumes of ionized vapor that hung in the air like spectral flags. Each step through the field felt like walking inside a heartbeat. The ground pulsed under their boots, the rhythm syncing with the oscillations of their stabilizers. Distant mountains warped between silhouettes, one snow-covered, one barren. The soldiers advanced through landscapes that disagreed with themselves. Every time Mara blinked, she saw another version of her team a few meters to the left, moving through the same terrain on a slightly different timeline. Sometimes, one of those echoes stumbled and fell, and when she looked back, a real soldier had collapsed unconscious, bleeding from the nose. At the same time, Colonel Idris and Kai coordinated the global logistics chain from the subterranean stronghold beneath Nairobi. Fuel convoys rerouted across fracturing trade routes. Data centers relocated to deep shielded bunkers insulated against phase bleed. He calculated energy distributions in silence, aware that each equation might be interpreted differently in another version of his command center. The logistics network had become a war of mathematics. Stabilizing quantum dampers required precise temporal alignment, yet time itself no longer obeyed standard increments. His staff used atomic chronometers to mark seconds, but those seconds no longer synchronized perfectly between hemispheres. Across the globe, small victories flickered like candlelight against the dark. Stabilizers deployed in Berlin held a quarter of the city steady for 5 continuous hours. Orbital Command 6 managed to transmit a coherent data packet through the distortion, proving that quantum entanglement links could still function under limited conditions. In the Pacific, a fleet of automated drones created a chain of temporary anchors along the magnetic equator, delaying atmospheric collapse. But each success carried a price. Every stabilizer induced gravitational strain that fractured tectonic plates beneath it. The crust began to shudder, releasing subterranean heat and radiation from the friction between overlapping realities. Volcanoes erupted simultaneously across mirrored coordinates, feeding fire into both worlds. Oceans boiled in isolated spirals where gravitational fields misaligned by millimeters. Alara studied the data until she recognized the pattern hidden beneath the destruction. The rift behaved like a neural network learning through feedback loops. Each failed stabilization attempt provided it new parameters, guiding it toward a more efficient equilibrium. The convergence wasn't chaotic, it was adaptive. The multiverse was learning how to merge. The more humanity fought to resist, the faster the alignment corrected itself. In the orbiting command vault, Kale reviewed casualty projections that rose with each hour. Every defense mechanism humanity employed accelerated the collapse. He realized the same lesson Alara had. Opposition was integration's fuel, yet surrender meant dissolution into an unrecognizable synthesis. Between those choices lay the narrow corridor of controlled coexistence. 2 realities maintaining boundary through mutual awareness rather than force. He authorized Operation Veilpoint, a desperate gambit that would attempt direct communication with the mirrored Earth. The mission's core relied on creating a synchronized quantum field bridge using the residual harmonics from prior incursions. It required a controlled overlap between 2 equivalent coordinates, one in orbit, one on the surface. Ghostline would deploy the surface anchor, while Alara and Kyle would initiate the orbital sequence. Preparation consumed the next 48 hours. Fuel reserves were rationed to power the Veilpoint reactor array. Atmospheric turbulence made launch trajectories unstable. Several shuttle crews perished attempting ascent through layered air. Ground command centers reported increasing visual duplications of the moon, 2 crescents hovering side by side, phasing through each other as tides collided. Humanity watched as its own reflection devoured the sky. On the eve of the operation, storms rolled across continents without weather fronts to explain them. Lightning flashed from one world into the other, bolts curving sideways across unseen boundaries. The entire planet vibrated with subsonic resonance, the tone deep and continuous, the sound of overlapping physics grinding against itself. Ghostline reached the designated anchor site in the ruins of Norilsk, where the first anomaly had appeared months before. The land was unrecognizable, scarred into crystalline plains that glowed from within. Stabilizers deployed in concentric rings, their magnetic fields intersecting to form a lattice of controlled coherence. Each device hummed as it aligned with the orbital relay. Power levels climbed beyond safe thresholds. The air thickened, bending light until even the shadows rippled. In orbit, the Veilpoint array unfolded like a mechanical bloom. Giant panels rotated to align with quantum resonance frequencies determined by Alara's algorithms. The system required perfect synchronization between 2 realities for even a fraction of a second. The bridge would either establish communication or merge both universes irreversibly. Alara monitored phase differentials through a storm of data noise. Her hands trembled over the controls, not from fear, but from the awareness that another version of her was likely doing the same, mirrored somewhere across the divide. The entire operation depended on mutual trust between selves that could never meet. Kyle gave the signal. Energy surged through the orbital reactors, channeling along electromagnetic corridors toward the Earth. The Veilpoint array ignited, visible from the ground as a column of blinding white light spearing through the clouds. Space itself folded inward. At Norilsk, Mara felt the pull as though gravity had doubled. The stabilizers screamed in protest, red warning halos blooming across her visor. The light above expanded into a sphere encompassing the entire horizon. For an instant, the world vanished. Sound, color, motion, all suspended. When perception returned, the landscape was different. The snow was gone, replaced by cracked soil under a yellow sky. Structures stood half-formed, merging the architecture of both worlds. Figures moved across the plain, soldiers in armor almost identical to ghost lines, their movements measured, wary. The mirrored world had materialized within reach. Sensors registered identical readings from both sides. Reality had aligned within tolerances too precise for chance. For the first time, the bridge between worlds held steady. Kale's heart pounded as orbital instruments confirmed stability. Across the divide, mirrored sensors would show the same data, the same heartbeat. But stability meant exposure. The shared space became a corridor neither side could control. Energy flux spiked as both realities attempted to claim dominance of the intersection. The bridge shimmered violently. The temperature dropped as entropy equalized across dimensions. Ilara's monitors exploded with cascading data, two universes feeding contradictory inputs into the same quantum equation. The system could not distinguish which reality to preserve. Without rapid modulation, the bridge would consume itself, dragging both worlds into collapse. She began rewriting resonance algorithms midstream, forcing the field into oscillation, alternating control between realities every millisecond. The maneuver extended stability, but at the cost of massive thermal feedback. In Norilsk, stabilizers began to melt. Mara's armor vibrated with unbearable intensity as molecular bonds strained under the alternating frequencies. She watched her hands blur between forms, each flicker showing another version of herself, some scarred, some dead, some unrecognizable. The psychological strain pressed against the limits of human endurance. Yet the team held position, anchoring the field with their presence alone. Above them, the Veil Point array groaned as its structure warped from the gravitational gradient. Kale remained at his station, eyes fixed on the telemetry. The bridge began to pulse, rhythmically, matching the interference pattern of human neural activity. The system was learning to translate cognition into quantum modulation. It was beginning to interpret thought as data. For the first time, Ilara detected coherent signals within the resonance stream, patterns resembling language, but multidimensional, constructed from probability amplitudes rather than syntax. She recognized her own brainwave signatures embedded within the waveform, mirrored and inverted. Communication had begun. The lights dimmed across the orbital deck as power rerouted to maintain stability. The bridge shimmered with growing intensity, now visible across both worlds as a pillar of intertwining colors that defied spectrum analysis. Humanity stood at the edge of contact, the moment when understanding could either save or erase them. Ilara leaned closer to the main console, reading the oscillations as they accelerated beyond comprehension. Her pulse matched their rhythm. The universe was speaking, and she was part of the sentence. The bridge flared. Every instrument screamed. The two realities shuddered toward convergence. And then, in the silence between moments, something reached back. Silence stretched across the void, immense and absolute. Then sound returned in fragments, a low vibration like the echo of distant thunder reverberating through the bones of the universe. Light bled back slowly, diffused through shifting clouds of color that refused to settle into a single hue. The air itself seemed uncertain, hesitating between textures of heat and cold. Mara regained consciousness inside what looked like a ruin of light. The ground beneath her glowed faintly, composed of smooth planes intersecting at unnatural angles. Her armor flickered between phases, each layer momentarily translucent before stabilizing again. Around her, the members of Ghostline lay scattered across a landscape that was neither Norilsk nor anything recognizable as Earth. The sky above swirled with two suns, one pale, one crimson, locked in orbit around each other. Mountains rose and collapsed in slow motion, rearranging their ridges like breathing organisms.